a great deal of personal pleasure for me to introduce one of my favorite scholars on Pakistan, the cinema, memory, art, um, a veritable polyglot and imaginative person who throws the most exciting insights into art, literature, and cinema at you and leaves you thinking about works that you're very familiar with and questioning your perceptions about that work. None other than Professor Iftikhar Dadi. He is the John H. Burris Professor in History of Art at Cornell University. And this morning, we're also introducing his book, Lahore Cinema, Between Realism and Fable. So the title itself makes you think immediately that what is he going to go about? So the way that we discussed, and I sort of said to Iftikhar that not a crow is going to be here to listen to my insights and what I have to say. So I want him to talk about the book and to tell us why he's written the book, why he's organized it the way he's organized it. And there are some key concepts which he has brought out to frame the book. And those are one, the Lahore effect. Secondly, he uses a term, recursive. So I've asked him to kindly explain what he means by that. And third, temporality. And of course, history, memory, perception, selfhood, everything comes into it. And when you're watching a film, all the questions that come into your mind and some that don't. So I'm going to now hand over to Iftikhar, and I might nudge you at a few places. The format that you've sent me, which is very useful. He's laid everything out. So, Iftikhar, why the book and how have you framed it?
Assalamu alaikum. It's very nice of all of you to be here. I'm very happy to be here to launch this book, Lahore Cinema, in Lahore, which is the right place for it. And I'm also delighted that Nasreen very kindly agreed to have this dialogue with me. She's done amazing work on early cinema in Lahore, and I would like to see that in print as soon as possible as well. so. So let me, the way we structured the presentation is that I'll talk about the concepts and the book, but also we'll show some clips. We'll try to show some clips because they're actually quite engaging, okay? And they speak to the arguments that I'm going to make. Clicker. So the book is, was published in late 2022, and there is an open access edition that is available. So legally, okay? Okay. So please download, and I'm trying to work on an Urdu translation, okay, to be published in Pakistan. But that may take a little bit of more time. Okay. So I just wanted to give you a sense of the contents and the kind of the key arguments, okay? So these are the chapters. The first chapter is called the Lahore effect, which lays out the kind of the methodological and historical premises, of the book. And I'll talk more about the parts in red, okay? Then chapter 1 is devoted to this film called Jago Hua Savera, okay, which was the only neo-realist film that was that Pakistan made. It was the screenplay and dialogues were written by Faiz Ahmed Faiz. So it's a very, very important film. It's available now online, and you should see it. And I have an extended discussion of this film. The second chapter is what I call I term it lyric romanticism, and I look at a single person who's Khurshid Anwar, who was both a music director and also later on a film director. The third chapter is on this, on these cinema and politics, or this a group of filmmakers really headed by Khalil Qaisar and Riyaz Shahid and the kind of works that they did. And the last chapter is on a film that jumps actually 50 years. Okay, so the first three chapters are in a period from between 1956 and 1969. But the last chapter jumps 50 years to a film called Zinda Bhag, which was 2013. And the reason I include it in this book is because I see it as a kind of a recursive or a way in which it refers back to earlier cinema, okay? Okay. So the introduction lays out kind of, the relationship between Lahore and Bombay cinema before the mid-50s, okay? Because, Lahore was an important center for filmmaking, which started off actually in the 1920s. And certainly by the early 1940s, Lahore was a very important center for, not as big as Bombay, obviously, but it made some very key and distinctive films. Then I talk about the long 60s, why I look at this period, and I'll explain that in a little bit. The rise and consolidation of the film song. So the film song in Indian cinema, but also in Pakistani cinema, doesn't really, the golden age really is crystallized between about 1948 and 1952, okay, in the film song. And so that's a period in which, the period I'm looking at is really benefits from the full, let's say, flowering and consolidation of the film song as a genre, okay? And then basically the relationship between Bombay and Lahore continues on in very complicated ways, in the 50s, 60s, and even further on, right? And one of the ways in which, a lot of Pakistani films are seen, I mean, there was a term in the industry called charba, okay? Charba was that you make a copy of an Indian film. And I want to think about copying and parasitism and kind of, let's say, reliance on common tropes and narratives in a much more open-ended and creative way rather than just thinking about original and copy, okay? I want to get away from the ideas of the original and the copy, okay? And that brings me to the Lahore effect, okay, which is a term actually that I've borrowed from an Indian film historian, Ashish Radhadhaksha, who's coined this term. And what he talks about in the Lahore effect is a relationship between kind of memory and fabling, okay? And the complication of a linear time, right? So in other words, so this is a film that is made, during modernity. We think of modernity as a series of progress and a kind of a linear unfolding of time, but cinema, especially Lahore cinema, is far more complicated than that because there are ways in which it refers back to earlier tropes, and there is a way in which the past and the present, okay, in terms of narrative as well as form, become intertwined in a way that is not so easy to disentangle, okay? And then the problem of, why did I write this book? Okay, partly to address the last point also, which is that we actually don't have any cinema archive in Pakistan. Bangladesh has one, India has one, etc. But the archive also is also not present in the memory of young people, okay? So, there can be an archive of celluloid and, material artifacts, but there's also an archive that exists in the memory of people. So, I mean, if you talk about young people today, I think they may know Guru Dutt or they may know Raj Kapoor, but I don't know if they'll know Khurshid Anwar, for example, right? So, what does that do? In some ways, is this a foolish attempt of me to kind of, in a sense, resurrect the question of memory? Because, perhaps it doesn't matter. I don't know. So, is this book a kind of a research-led attempt, or is it really a foolish and quixotic attempt? Okay, so I don't know. That's something we can talk about. Okay, now this period in gray is the long 60s for me, okay? And you can see that there's a very dramatic rise in the cinema production, okay? So you can see that from 1956 to 1969, the top line is in the Urdu cinema, but you also see actually tremendous growth in especially Punjabi and Bengali cinema. Bengali films being made in Dhaka, okay, Urdu films being made mostly in Lahore but also in Karachi, right? And as well as in Dhaka, right? So there were actually 3 centers for Urdu film production. And then Punjabi films being made in Lahore primarily, okay? And so I'm only looking at Urdu, okay? But of course, the other language, the vernacular language cinemas are deeply neglected and they need study, okay? Okay. Now the kind of, yes, yeah.
I think that what's very important, the points that Iftikhar has raised, and while we'll be watching the clips, is memory and loss. Because he starts with Jago Hua Savera, which is, of course, East Pakistan. And when you see a lot of the films, very often the credits used to be in Bangla. Even our money used to have Bangla on it. So, and of course, what we see and what existed was a multilingual cinema. So, over back to you for the archive.
Okay, now, given that there is no official archive, or even an unofficial I mean, there are unofficial archives, I suppose. There are people who collect cinema materials, okay? There are, also, the way Pakistani films have survived is that I cannot find the celluloid, okay? So during the 1980s, there was a company called Shalimar Recording Company that converted many of the celluloid to VHS, okay, and also for broadcasting on TV. So if those things happen, then you can maybe find somebody will burn you a DVD or something, okay? But actually, many key films that were not blockbusters are lost now, okay, or at least I cannot find them, okay? This is a very urgent issue, and there seems to be, I don't know if there are any attempts to kind of create an archive, but this is a very serious shortcoming, okay, in terms of the history of Pakistani culture, okay. But you have things like, you also have journals like this, Eastern Film. This used to come out of Karachi, okay, and is an important film journal. So you have things like that you find, okay.
And of course, celluloid is very inflammable. So if any of you find any pieces, even odd pieces, of old celluloid films, please rescue them, keep them, and bring them to Iftikhar's attention.
Okay, now let's talk about the Lahore effect. Okay, so one of the ways in which Ashish Daksha conceived the Lahore effect is really through, the Anarkali myth. Okay, so the Anarkali myth was, as you know, is the story of Anarkali. Everyone knows. I don't have to repeat it. Okay, but it was first kind of written up. There were some oral kind of, renditions of this, but it was written up in 1922 by Imtiaz Ali Taj. Again a Lahore-based author. Okay, and and then it was made repeatedly in actually many languages, even in languages in the Indian South, in the South Indian kind of languages, right? And and one of the most famous, renditions is Mughal-e-Azam from 1960, which is, was one of these very lavish and extravagant productions of. So now, what's happening between 1922 and 1960, and even continuing on till today, right? So what is that, like the mythos of Anarkali that keeps repeating? Okay, it's a doomed and impossible love affair, right? So it's a romance. It's set supposedly in a real Mughal historical context with Akbar and Prince Salim and so on, right? So how do we kind of entangle or disentangle the relation between memory and myth and realism, right? Okay, and this is I began to think about Anarkali's tomb, and I have this question for actually Lahoris. Okay, maybe some of you have an answer. Who is buried in Anarkali's tomb? Can anyone answer? Does anyone have an answer? Huh? Huh? Yeah, but there is something, but I have an answer, okay? What is buried so you have a tomb, you have a sarcophagus, okay? But it became an archive, right? And what you have is, you have the Bhagat Singh papers and you have the mutiny papers in it, okay? So what's buried in Anarkali's tomb is actually revolutionary history, right? Okay, okay. Okay, and that actually brings me to that you cannot disentangle fabling, romance, okay, from politics, from realism. Okay, that's kind of the point of I'm trying to make. Okay. Uh, okay, and Bhagat Singh's trial was in Lahore. Okay, the reason I'm bringing up Bhagat Singh is because Khurshid Anwar, the director, whom I'm going to talk about, I talk about in chapter 2, and I hope to show you some images and clips of his film. Was somebody who, as a young man, attended Bhagat Singh's trial, became a revolutionary, okay, was jailed for his revolutionary activities, but later on, he becomes one of the most kind of romantic kind of directors, okay? He actually doesn't pursue direct politics in his later films. So what's the relationship between kind of his lyric romanticism later in his career and his early involvement in kind of revolutionary activities, okay? So that's another entanglement I want to think about productively, okay? And so Bhagat Singh's last letter to his brother is also full of poetry, okay? Okay. Okay, so now let me come to, I wanted to give a sense of, um, some, I wanted to just give you a sense of two of the chapters. So I'll start with chapter 3, and I'll hope to discuss one film from chapter 3, and then we'll look at chapter 2 and discuss one film from chapter 2, okay? So in cinema and politics, I look at Khalil Qaisar and Riaz Shahid, who were a pair of kind of, filmmakers. But they were not alone, obviously. They were working with a whole galaxy of, other people in the industry, okay, poets, the lyricists, screenplay writers, okay, actors and actresses, etc. And they were they were very prolific and productive. They have something like there are about 50 projects that they were involved in. Okay, so it's actually quite a difficult task to also just kind of try to trace their kind of entanglements, which I've done, okay, in spreadsheets and charts and notations, which I'm not showing you here. Okay, and oops. Okay. So the one film I'm going to talk about is this film called Badnaam, which was released in 1966. Okay, the director is Iqbal Shehzad, who was actually a sound technician in Karachi in Eastern Film Studios, and then he came and made this. This was his debut venture as a director. And the story is by Saadat Hassan Manto. The story is Jhumke, and the dialogues and screenplay are written by Riaz Shahid, who was also called Manto of the film world, okay? Which is a bit odd because Manto himself was Manto of the film world, okay? So, okay, okay. The musician is very interesting. This is Debo Bhattacharya, okay? A Hindu Bengali who came to West Pakistan and worked here on many films, okay? So this is also another entanglement in which, many of these people actually continued on into even after 1971 working in Lahore cinema. Okay? And actually, Lahore cinema after the 70s continues to be dominated by Bengalis. Okay? So after 71 even, right? Okay, and the poets are major poets, right? People like Tanveer Naqvi and Himayat Ali Shair, etc. Okay, and the singers are also very noted. Soraya Multanikar, Nahid Niazi, Irene Parveen, Masood Rana, these are all kind of important singers. And then the key actors are Nilo Shahid, Ijaz, and Alauddin. I want you to pay a little bit of attention to the poster. Unfortunately, the screen resolution is not the best, but you see the poster, it shows a globe, it shows the cosmos, okay? And in the cosmos, you'll see these little jewels, okay? There are pieces of jewelry that float among the stars, okay? So the relationship the film is going to forge at a formal level will be between kind of the miniature, okay, Lahore as a city, and the globe and globality, right? So there's a way in which there's a kind of a constant mapping back and forth between these the personal and private lives of a few individuals, minor characters, their place in Lahore, and kind of global geopolitics. Okay. Okay. So the plot is something like this: that Hamida is okay. I'll just read a little bit of the plot. Okay. So Badnaam is this landmark accomplishment, right? And so the plot is this, right? Dino is a poor man who owns a tonga and works long hours to provide for his young wife Hamida and daughter Saida. Their home is quite spare, but next to a small mirror on the wall hangs a page from a magazine which shows a woman adorned in jewelry with jhumke or bell-shaped pendant earrings. Okay? Hamida really wants jhumke of her own. Dino visits a jeweler who gives him a price, and he tries to save up money, right? And it so happens that he's able to, he goes to the jeweler, and one night when he has enough money, right? And you see him posed. So this shot frames him against a poster of another Riaz Shahid and Khalil Qaisar production, right? Which is actually an anti-colonial film, right? Whereas Badnaam is not an anti-colonial film; it's a social film. Okay, but again, you have it's the same actor Alauddin, okay, in both, right? So you have a doubling. So this doubling is also a kind of this is a constant leitmotif or reminder of the kind of relationship between kind of social life and geopolitics. All right. Okay. Hamida, there's a kind of a creepy landlord who lives on top of the Dino's family, right? And Wahid Wine, yeah, this gentleman on the right. And, Hamida, the daughter visits him sometimes. Hamida goes up and she finds jewelry strewn about. Okay, she tries to steal Jhumke. She's caught. Okay, and she's forced to submit to his. He blackmails her basically. She's forced to submit to him, and afterwards, the deal is that when she leaves, she can keep the Jhumke as payment. Okay, so. So this is the scene where she's leaving, and she's become almost like an automaton. Okay, she's stumbling about. Okay, leaving, and she comes down back home, right? So when she comes back home, we have the very famous dialogue. Okay, so clip one, chalaiye please. नहीं, I have the translation. वो उस पे है. Okay. Okay. So So this dialogue has become something of a cult classic in Pakistani cinema, or paisa vasool, according to some critics. Okay, according to observers, audiences would return repeatedly to see Badnaam just to see this scene. Okay, and so Dino walks backward, accompanied with a dissonant score, the camera focusing on his outstretched hands and jerky articulations. He moves back from where he started, extremely perturbed, crying out her name. He begins a new monologue of impassioned rage and sorrow. And the Dino appears to float backwards towards Hamida in a rack focus technique, okay, as she slowly comes into focus. And he comes nearer to her, both facing the camera. I mean, I want to emphasize that Badnaam is actually technically a very accomplished film, okay? And I'll show you some other examples. And, okay, so why, so what will happen, this ends, the first part of the film ends here, okay? Now, we should ask, why did this dialogue become something of a cult classic? Okay, what does that say about Pakistani society at the time, right? Okay, and I think this is something worth discussing about questions of male authority, okay, patriarchy, and also the question of the possibility of the relate. So the whole film is disturbing because it has a very disturbing subtext, which is that if a marriage is based upon Jhumke, but if a sexual transaction is also based on Jhumke, then what really is the difference between them, right? Okay. Okay. Now, so Dino picks up Saida, his daughter, and leaves the house forever, okay? And I would say the popularity of this dialogue is a manifest index to anxiety surrounding conjugal relations and the status of women at a time of accelerating social change, right? Popular forms manage. So how do we understand popular culture in relation to kind of, let's say, the society or politics, right? Usually popular culture is not, does not have a manifesto, does not take a clear ideological position, right? So you have to look at the fault lines in popular culture, as ways to think about the anxieties and kind of, tensions and fault lines in a social fabric at any one time, right? So that's, and I'm getting this from kind of cultural studies, okay? So I'm just also giving you my stakes. Okay. The second part of the film begins with Hamida going back to the landlord to ask for shelter, but he harshly berates her and telling her that she is not trustworthy. He dramatically offers her a lipstick, a premonition of her life to come as a fallen woman, as a courtesan, okay? Meanwhile, Dino and Saida move to another small home, and he begins working very long hours to provide for her education. Years pass, and Saida, now played by Nilo, which is here, okay, comes of age as a graceful and accomplished young woman who joins an elite college. Here she meets Saeed, a young man from a poor rural family who is initially a social misfit in this elite college, right? And has been heckled by his classmates. Saeed and Saida begin to fall in love, and Saeed gifts her a pair of jhumke one day as a token of his love for her. When Dino sees Saida with the jhumke, he imagines that his worst fears are coming to realization and that Saida is falling prey to the same desires that led her mother astray. Eventually, however, Saida is able to convince Dino that the gift she received was not intended for a sexual transaction, but as an expression of true love. Uh, so then Dino brings Saida to, okay, and then the plot kind of continues on, okay? Now let's come to, now let me just say a few words about Badnaam. So Badnaam is distinctive as a film on several levels. Riaz Shahid's dialogues of the film are considered to be the best he ever wrote, okay? In their appropriateness, affect, and symbolism. And the words used are Chabuk Dast and Jamai Andaz, okay? They have never been equaled, according to a critic. The film's camera work and editing breaks away from deeply sedimented theatrical conventions that characterize a social film from Lahore. Okay. So now I'm going to show you a couple of songs. Okay, so let's look at this Mujra song. So ये clip चलाइए, clip 2. Okay. Now this comes right after Saeed, Dino leaves the daughter after the Jumka scene. Okay, where he leaves the house. Okay, and Dino is driving his Tonga across Lahore. Okay, and it kind of maps, so he's this Tonga wala. He's not a very important person supposedly, but he's traversing Lahore. And Lahore it's very interesting because he goes from the train station to these newly built kind of bourgeois and kind of, corporate structures, okay, to the old city. So in a way, and then overlaid is his kind of inner life, right? So it's a kind of a psychogeography or a mapping of Lahore onto the psyche, right? Okay, so again, this mapping between the kind of the interior world, the bigger world, and then the even bigger world, which is geopolitics. And we'll come to that. Okay. I think my slides are out of order. Okay, so then now let's look at clip 3. Okay, and I'll explain this. Okay. So this is a famous song, and you may even like remember the song. Okay, so after Hamida's fall into prostitution at the kotha of the courtesans who perform for an audience, another haunting song and dance sequence was filmed and edited with techniques uncommon in Lahore cinema, such as crane shots, which is the shot that moves from the balcony down to the street, okay? Canted and unconventional angles that you see in this clip, and montage editing, okay? The sequence evokes a sensorial experience of fragmented theatricality. Dino drives a client to the red light district on the street as the Mujra dance performance begins one floor upstairs at a balcony overlooking the street. The crane shots move alternately from showing Dino close up to gliding one floor up to a long shot of the balcony from the outside. Inside, Hamida is singing the lyrics of the song Bade Be Murawwat Hain Ye Husn Wale and playing the tampura. Note that, and you also see these giant rotating chandeliers in the shot, and that's another meaning of Jhumka, is that round chandelier. Okay. Polished mirrors dizzyingly reflect the dancer, and an outsized rotating chandeliers frames her in short compositions that evoke a world of glittering surface effects. Across these, the lyrics of the song reverberate in sonic waves, performed by the Kaifi singer Suraya Multanikar. The song became immensely popular, the circulation far beyond the film itself. And again, let me note that the music director is a Bengali, okay, Debo Bhattacharya. Okay. Okay. How are we doing? Okay, we are okay? Okay, now let's come to another song which is quite memorable. So, ये clip चलाएं, ugly clip. हाँ. अच्छा, तो clip 4 चला दें. कुछ out of order हो गया. So another, it's 5 minutes. I can't show you 5 minutes. It's worth seeing. Okay. Another remarkable song sequence, बहुत बेआबरू होके तेरे कूचे से हम निकले, we departed from your street in disgrace, performed by the male students in their college hostel who lampoon another student who was beaten up by Dino for insinuating that Saida was a loose woman. Okay, the refrain in this qawwali is taken from Ghalib, that is ostensibly addressed to a beloved who rejects and humiliates the lover. Symbolism in ghazal is multivalent, obviously, and here its parody also addresses anti-imperial geopolitics, right? 3 students, one of them dressed as a Victorian gentleman, evidently modeled after Sherlock Holmes, I think, okay, to signify the British, a French legionnaire, and an Uncle Sam or an Uncle Tom figure, performed by Saeed, stand near a large wall map of Africa and mock the defeat of the British in Suez, the withdrawal of France from Algeria, and the retreat of US forces from Korea. Okay? And also, it's a very strange, it starts off as a qawwali and becomes something like a British skit. Okay, so it's a very interesting transformation of the genre, okay, that takes place. Okay, so Badnaam is, constantly punctuated with reference to historical and contemporary leftist and anti-colonial struggles, even though it's ostensibly a social film, right? So again, I'm trying to think about the relationship between the private universe of these seemingly minor characters, right? And the kind of the larger, the geopolitical stakes that these filmmakers are also very much aware of, right, at that time. Okay. So the last clip is the clip on the globe. तो ये clip भी चला दें? नहीं, एक आखिरी clip भी है. ये clip 5 टोंगा नहीं है, उसमें वो होगी, globe वाली clip होगी. Clip 5 चला दें. वो तो होगी ना बात. Okay. Okay, so this clip comes right after, this sequence comes, again, it's much longer, I'm only giving you a little bit. This comes right after Saida receives Jhumke again, and then he realizes that, she may go astray, right? And so he directs his monologue to a small globe she's using for her geography studies, okay? So she makes a point of saying, buy me a globe because I'm studying geography, okay? Okay, the globe serves as a stand-in for society at large, which denigrates the value of labor and honesty and instead uses gold to manipulate human needs and weaknesses and takes advantage of this dependence for exploitation. Okay, this sequence is among the most resonant in the film, shot from multiple angles, including close-ups of shots of Dino angrily addressing the globe and then him facing the camera in a composition in which the globe is recessed in the background. So it's similar to the way that Jhumke scene was shot, okay? So there's also this kind of formal correspondence between the Jhumke scene and the globe, which is ostensibly about geopolitics, okay? So I want to pay attention, I'm trying to pay attention to form as well, right, in these analysis. Right, okay.
I'm going to sort of hasten you for time, because I think you want the audience to see enough of Ghungat as well.
Yes, okay.
And the things that you have saved up.
All right, so let's move to Ghungat. Yeah. Okay. So there's lots of all these circular motifs, including iris, kind of dissolves and things like that, okay? All right, let's now move to chapter 2, and I'll try to show you a very interesting film from chapter 2 as well, okay? Now, okay, so Khurshid Anwar was this, he was highly educated. He had a master's in philosophy, and he received a gold medal from government college, right? And he was a fellow traveler with Faiz Ahmad Faiz, and they were friends, okay? So, and I explained already that he got mixed up with Bhagat Singh, okay, during his, when he was quite young, when he was 17 or 18, something like that, right? And during the 40s and 50s, Anwar had worked as a music director. He grew up in Lahore, and then in 1940, he moves to Delhi to work in All India Radio. Then he's recruited to Bombay Cinema, and from 40 to 52, he works in Bombay. Okay? And renowned as a peerless music director in Lahore, he's also considered among the most sophisticated directors of Pakistani cinema. The close association of Anwar and his associates in writing, composing, producing, and directing this cluster of films offers a kind of a vision for ambitions of this romanticist project, which unfolds across a decade or something like that. Okay. So, he grew up, his father was a lawyer, he had a huge collection of books and, records, they would have musical gatherings, so he was very immersed from from his childhood into the world of music and theater, okay. And I explained the Bhagat Singh business already with him, okay. But later on, he repudiates actually Marxism. Interestingly, he says, Bhagat Singh is my ideal, but he says, Marxism never appealed to me, right? So he actually is trying to mark a difference between him and some of the more socially progressive kind of writers. Okay? Yeah, okay. So given his avowed repudiation of Marxism, right, and his prior affiliation with Bhagat Singh and his deep interest in bridging the legacy of Hindustani classical music, he emerges as this exemplary figure, okay? And one of the films he made, in Bombay was this film called Parwana, okay, which actually was released in 1947 and was showed during the partition. And I also want to think about again the question of politics and kind of lyricism, okay, which you can see from a kind of a memoirs of somebody um, who um, who was witness to this. Okay, so so he's this exemplary figure. Okay, his films mourn the partition, and almost all of them are partition allegories. Okay, very complex allegories, and engage with modernity that is fatally seductive. Okay, and it's in his partitions, kind of these kind of haunting effects are repeated in his films as doubled and misidentified characters, gothic specters, okay, Indic primitivist myths, quote unquote, and ruined and traumatized lives. Okay, so let's look at this film now. Okay, so Ghungat is, the veil. Okay, so director, writer, and music is done by him. Okay, poets are Tanveer Naqvi and Faiz. Singers are again, very important, Noor Jahan, Mehdi Hassan, people like that. Okay, and the actors. Okay. Okay, so let's पहली clip दिखा दें. Yes, clip 6 दिखा दें.
हम दो अजनबी एक होकर अपनी मंजिल की जानिब जा रहे हैं। आपने मेरी लिखी हुई कहानियां पढ़ी तो होंगी। एक दिन मैंने अम्मी से पूछा, मेरी होने वाली दुल्हन कैसी है? तो हंस के बोले, वो जो तेरी कहानी है ना, पूर्वन की रानी, बस यूं समझ ले तेरे लिए पूर्वन की रानी ला रही। पूर्वन की रानी, बचपन में मैंने उसे देखा था। एक धुंधली सी तस्वीर, सफेद साड़ी में लिपटी हुई, मोतिये का हार पहने, खुशबू बखेरती धुन में गायब हो जाती। वो मेरी जिंदगी का सबसे बड़ा ख्वाब है, और आज इस वक्त में मैं उसी ख्वाब की ताबीज देखना चाहता हूँ।
Okay, so this claustrophobic encounter between two strangers has been freighted already with Shahid's impossible desire to have his bride confirmed to a ghost. Okay, the opening sequence effectively sets up the premise and the mood of the film. Shahid, an impractical man half living in a dream world that seeps into his fiction writing, is completely disconnected from his bride, whose face he has not yet seen. Okay, and then what happens is after this, the train sequence, which is actually 7 minutes long, it's a very it's very kind of clinical and kind of alienating kind of sequence, right? And then she disappears basically. Okay, so she disappears and he has a emotional crisis, right? And in order to get out of his emotional crisis, the doctor advises him to go back to the hills where he had seen Purban Kirani, in his childhood. Okay. So, in an effort to break out of the limbo, Shahid's mother informed him that it is the season when timber is being harvested in the family business. So, अगला clip दिखा दें. नहीं वो है उसको.
कोई 25-30 बरस उधर की बात है। पुजारी की बेटी उषा रानी और श्याम एक दूसरे से प्यार करते थे।
श्याम?
हाँ, श्याम, जो सुंदर नवास में रहता था। उसके वालिद लाहौर के बहुत बड़े रईस थे। वो लोग हर साल गर्मियों में यहाँ आया करते थे।
और फिर
वही कुछ हुआ जो धन वाले किया करते हैं। श्याम के अमीर बाप ने गरीब पुजारी की बेटी को ठुकरा दिया। ऊंचे घर से श्याम के लिए दुल्हन ले आया, पर दुल्हन का चेहरा देखने से पहले ही श्याम ने जहर खाकर अपनी जान दे दी।
जान दे दी?
हाँ, और उसकी मौत के बाद उषा रानी भी झील में कूद कर मर गई। वो दिन और आज का दिन उषा रानी की बेचैन रूह सुंदर नवाज के गिर्द भटकती रहती है।
So I just want to say here that I've seen this film about 10 times, and whenever I come to this scene, so I'm reminded of a history of loss, a retrieving of memory, and always Faiz Saab's Ye Daag Daag Ujala, because it is about loss, profound loss, and no hope.
PowerPoint लगाए ना? अच्छा, so Usha Rani was the daughter of a temple priest who fell in love with Shyam, the son of a wealthy businessman from Lahore who was visiting from the city. Forbidden by the father to marry into Usha Rani's poverty-stricken family, Shyam was forced to return to the city and was coercively betrothed to another woman from a more suitable class background. In despair, Shyam committed suicide by drinking poison on his wedding night without lifting the bride's veil, right? Usha Rani also drowned herself in the lake in Purban, but her spirit continues to haunt the valley even today, right? So when basically there's an abandoned Hindu temple, when the bells ring, then Usha Rani appears and, in this very, majestic and ethereal kind of way, right? And Shahid is there, he's falling in love with her, right? And he's becoming more and more, and sometimes she appears as a Hindu goddess, basically, okay? Okay, and she shows Shahid these, love notes in Devanagari, okay? And she says, remember your past janam, okay? Previous reincarnation. He says, I don't remember anything. He says, please, we wrote this in our past, past lives, right? Okay. So Shahid becomes more and more enthralled with the spectral figure of Usha Rani, okay? And and he says, I can't read Hindi, and she says, we wrote this, don't you remember? Try to remember, right? Okay. So then the only way for them to be together, she eventually tells him, is for him to bring his wife Nahid, you remember the Nahid who had left in the train carriage, okay, to Purban and to drown her in the lake, right? After her drowning, Usha Rani's ghost will inhabit Nahid's body, right? And they will be together in this incarnation in a way that they could not be in the previous incarnation. So, agla clip chalaiye. Okay. So I love the sadistic kind of undertones in this film. Okay.
उस जगह कभी मैं डूब के मरी
And Gothic, yes.
डूब के मरी और उस जगह मुझे नहीं किसी और को मरना चाहिए था.
किसको?
तुम्हारी बीवी को, तुम्हारी बीवी को, तुम्हारी बीवी को,
एक बीवी अपने शौहर के लिए क्या कुछ कर सकती है?
अपनी जान तक दे सकती है।
क्या क्या आप मुझे अपनी जिंदगी दे सकती हैं?
ये जिंदगी आप ही की है।
अगर आप मेरी जिंदगी चाहती हैं तो
हाँ हाँ,
आपको इस झील में डूबना होगा।
ऐसा ही है तो मेरी जान हाजिर है। आइए, अपने हाथों से मुझे इस झील में फेंक दीजिए। और जब उसकी लाश झील की तह में पहुंच जाएगी तो मेरी आत्मा उसके शरीर में चली जाएगी, चली जाएगी, चली जाएगी, चली जाएगी।
नहीं।
So,
I'll just say one line. So, okay, so Anwar's cinema, in conclusion, I'm trying to hurry, insistently urges its audience to remember a recent past not defined by the selective amnesia of the nation state of Pakistan, basically, okay, and suggests effective potentialities of cultural forms that might heal colonial modernity's fractures of the self. Anwar's cinema moves away from overt cultural politics to offer a profound reflection on the divided ego, inhabiting these fissures in an affective and open-ended manner. Okay, so let me end here. Yeah.
so indeed, hugely misogynistic scene representing overtly and intrinsically misogynist cinema of that time and thinking. And with that, of course, he makes no attempt to rescue her. What then happens in the film is a different matter, but he just stands her there and watches her sink. And of course, she pledges herself to him when he says, "What are you going to do for your husband?" And she says, "I'll offer my life." And indeed she does. And she sinks. And her ghungat is floating on the lake. So with that creepy end, we'll open the floor to questions. And please, we don't have much time. So questions for Iftikhar. One short question, please, because I don't think we can take more than about 4 or 5 max. So questions.
My question is about like the kind of like over exaggerating tone of like these characters throughout this cinema. We watch some clips from 2 movies, and all of them are like, kind of exaggerating their tone, or एक किस्म की एक मुलायम सी आवाज़ जो है दोनों करेक्टर रिगार्डलेस ऑफ प्रोटैगनिस्ट एंड एंटागनिस्ट. तो क्या ये उस सिनेमा की कोई खासियत थी, और it was the necessity of the time or something? Yeah, really curious about it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I would ask you, what you're judging this against, in the sense that, all cinema is a fable, right? All of it is a form, right? And it's all of it is a language. So if you're used to, let's say, Pakistani TV dramas, then this may look excessive, right? But I would say that the reverse, that Pakistani TV dramas are too dull, right? They have only normalized characters, for example, right? So in other words, what is considered to be normal? Right? This is a performance. It's an evocation of a certain subjectivity, right? And I think the extreme subjectivities are good because they expand our horizon as to what is possible, lives we can inhabit. Okay?
Also, that your question is interesting because there's a pathology of the state and of the selfhood that this cinema represents. Other questions? कहाँ? Oh, right there. Mic ऊपर ले जाइए, please.
Other people have names, they can raise their hands and we can take them in turns. Acha, there's one up there. Okay.
Hello, hello. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned that in 1922 there was in 1922, or I guess I misheard that, but around the 1960s when these movies were again, you mentioned that the movie, I don't remember the name right now, but the 1960s movie had some good editings in it. But the thing I want to ask is, how did they manage to do editing if there wasn't any major electronics or major computers back then?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a much bigger question. But cinema from the very beginning, I mean, cinema is defined by editing, right? I would say.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
that goes back really to the Soviets. People like Eisenstein and okay. So I think basically editing is invented pretty early on in cinema. It's of course much easier to do digitally, but people were very skilled in doing editing even through on
Yes,
celluloid.
but
Yeah.
the question is that how did they manage to do it?
Well, I mean, I would have to go into techniques which I don't have time to answer for.
Okay.
But they, given the means that they had, some of the most sophisticated films in world cinema have been made by old-fashioned cutting and splicing. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Firstly, please, thank you so much for compiling this. This is gold for newer filmmakers because we don't have much resources that, compile the film history in Pakistan especially. So in your opinion, what do you think is the most crucial thing that newer filmmakers should keep in mind if they were to attempt to resurrect the film industry, since, the production went down after a lot of reasons that we know. So in your opinion, how do we save it?
Well, we are in a very different age now, right? Because we didn't have continuity between the old studios and the young filmmakers now. I mean, you can see how basically around 1980 film production is declining precipitously, right? Now, there are three reasons for it: the VCR, Ziaul Haq, okay, and the loss of Bangladesh, okay, as a market. Okay, those are the three reasons. Okay, and and the numbers are, if you look at something like in 1969, you have more than 100 films released. You have a film being released every 3 days. Okay? Pakistan was among the top 10 film producing countries in the world. All right? So this is not a minor kind of achievement, right? Now, the people who come to cinema today, I mean, I think you're better informed about contemporary cinema, but they either come from NGOs or they come from media houses, okay, like, television, dramas, okay, or they come from the NGO circuit and things, and making documentaries about, various things. And, I still find there are some good films that have been made. I think the last chapter I write in this book is on Zinda Bhag, right? And the reason I included this because I jumped 50 years. And the reason I include Zinda Bhag is because I find Zinda Bhag actually to be a very interesting film because it's a highly recursive film, right? It constantly harks back to earlier tropes and formal developments in Indian and Pakistani and cinema, okay, and Bengali cinema, things like that. So I find that to be very useful because it's actually trying to create a bridge over over that decline of cinema for several decades, and it's one way to kind of, in a sense, do the work of memory, okay. Otherwise, of course, you should make the films you need to make, right? Given your concerns of today, but I think it doesn't hurt to be informed of what happened in the past, right? So you can learn lessons from it. There's a question here. Yeah, no, it's very bad. I mean, even TV dramas, which Pakistan, people pride themselves of, that Pakistan produces great dramas, and it does to some degree, but I find the themes to be very narrow. It's either a women's oppression or feudal oppression or some, and they're very boring. Like the camera, it's everything is evenly lit. There's no camera angle except a straight camera angle. People act in tableau form.
Yes.
Okay, there are no excessive characters, right? So you get a very kind of a normalized way of thinking about characterization, narrative, form. Okay, it doesn't really, you don't learn anything, right? So try to watch other things, right? Try to watch things that are made in Pakistan, but also made earlier, right? Like Badnaam and Ghungat and many other. Susral is another film I could have talked about. Very interesting film, almost like a Fellini film, made by Riyaz Shahid, set in the old city with all minor flawed characters. There's no hero, no villain. Okay, very, very interesting film, 1960, right? So there are those kinds of things that were done in this country, but there have been, great, experiments done in other places, and learn and inform yourself. See what you respond to, right? Yeah.
यहाँ दीजिए please. Hello.
Yeah.
इस तरफ पे. Second row.
Thank you. First of all, I want to congratulate that first time I have seen such a galaxy of people listening Pakistani cinema, and they are talking about it. Congratulations for this thing. But
Thank you.
but
I had mentioned to Tariq Ali.
Let me finish.
Okay.
But the real maker of cinema in Pakistan is Hazim Qadri. He has written 650 scripts, and he has made the cinema popular with the masses. And you haven't mentioned his name. I'm very sorry.
Yeah. So let me just say that there's obviously I've only written on 7 films and 3 or 4 filmmakers, and I've written in them in depth. So there is a lot of work that has to be done. Okay, but I don't want to do a survey. I don't care about doing surveys. I want to do analysis. Okay, so that's one thing. Okay, so if you feel that this person is important, then please write about him, or somebody should write about him. Okay, because definitely these we need to kind of, in a sense, even if it's a critical book. Right? That's important. A second thing is, I'll just tell you a joke, which is Tariq Ali, I mentioned to him a few years ago, he said, "Kya kar rahe ho?" I said, "I'm writing this book." He said, "Oh, that will be a short book." Okay, that was his quip. So, I mean, it's still a short book, I agree, but more can be done, all right? Yeah.
Here is the book. Please download the PDF. And it's an absolute treat. And those of you who are scholars of the film or incipient scholars or fans, you will find a lot to engage with and perhaps even write about the cinema. So as Iftikhar is saying, that lots of gaps to be filled. But Iftikhar, thank you so much, for which I knew was going to be a packed, interesting, exciting presentation, and which is why I did not agree to do a conversation.
So I'll just mention that if you go to this website, this Manifold platform is actually a very user-friendly way of reading. You can annotate, you can search, you can do many things in this way, okay? So thank you all for coming and for your questions.